dancing.
Great. The rain didn't sour the mood.
Yeah, the rain is cool.
Oh, okay, good. That's what matters.
Dancing in the rain.
Dancing in the rain. Oh yeah, I did. No, okay, that's great. I'm glad you guys had a good time. Yeah. So as I mentioned on Friday, today we're going to take a look at the final components of the assessments that we can participate in completing when it comes to working with clients. First time we looked at preference assessments. This again was being able to identify things that the client likes, so see if there's something we can work with to help motivate them to work on their goals. Then we looked at skill assessments, so the very goals that will help them develop those crucial functional skills. And now we're going to be taking a look at functional behavioral assessments. Now this part brings home together many of the things we've already discussed previously about being able to think functionally, trying to identify some of the variables that may influence problem behavior. So for some of you, this may be a little bit of a review, but in a new application. Always we begin with the question of what is a functional assessment or a FBA, functional behavior assessment? Just as we want to implement a function-based intervention for the clients to address the particular need that they have, because again, we can think of every form of behavior, whether or not it's vocal or the use of gestures, as communication. When somebody does something, it is a way of telling you that they want or need something. There's some message that they're trying to convey. And if we are able to address things by their function to give them an alternative to the problem behavior, then that is probably the most humane way to approach the intervention. Instead of relying on punishment procedures and these other default interventions that, yeah, shouldn't be our first option. Yeah, ultimately, we're trying to understand why behavior is occurring. These should be somewhat familiar to you guys already. The way to memorize the functions of behavior: seat, sensory or automatic, escape or avoidance. Then there's access to tangibles, or attention, and then access to tangibles. Again, this one should be reviewed for most of us. For any given reason that a individual may be engaging in problem behavior, typically it would fall under these four categories, or a mix of them, depending on what the antecedents are. Good, guys? Okay, this, again, something we've discussed previously, ABC data collection. In order to identify the function of behavior, we have to see what happens before it, that being the antecedents. Behavior itself, what it looks like, typography, or just the form of behavior, and the consequences. What happens immediately after? How does the environment or the individuals present respond to the behavior occurring? So in this example, let's say the client was given a task or request to have his lunch bag put away. He then threw a plastic plate on the floor. That's behavior. And the consequence is having to pick it up and then saying, "We don't throw." And we've gone through a few of these together. So confident say that we've kind of dove into the ABC data collection world. And then, of course, we always want to be objective with our descriptions of behavior, just as we want a operational definition that can allow anybody with sufficient amount of training to identify what that behavior is. We want to be able to write it out when we're taking ABC data. For anybody to have a good idea of what happened physically. So instead of using subjective language, discussing emotions or feelings such as frustration or aggression, we can then instead use something a little bit more objective, such as, yeah, the client striking the table, throwing an item across the table or the room. Yeah, because if we aren't all under agreement of what the behavior looks like, then it's kind of hard for us to really recognize a trend if it's actually going down or not, or if it's going up, rather. So that is why it's really important to be able to write behavior in its most objectable terms possible. Guys with me so far? Yeah, this should be, for the most part, mostly review. Focus on actions, not just labels. So that's one way we can participate in the functional assessment process, collecting that ABC data. Now, something else that we can do is using what is referred to as indirect assessments. So these usually come in the forms of what we have here, questionnaires or rating scales. This is something that you go through. It's a form or a series of questions that you would ask somebody who knows the client very well, has seen them engage in the problem behavior, and from those you ask as to what the potential function of the behavior is. Now, the indirect methods aren't always perfect because it's mostly that of us, and with questionnaires they're usually fixed, so it's a scale of 1 to 5, or it's a yes or no questions, as is with the FAST, which I'll show you guys in just a moment. Well, for the most part, this gives us good material to rule off potential behaviors. Because if we're doing the questionnaire and it looks as though, oh, the client's doing everything for attention, then that can guys give us an idea, okay, that should be something that we would look out for. Client is doing things for attention, and we're trying to figure out if that's what's controlling the problem behavior or maintaining it, then that gives us good grounds to be able to test it. So here's an example of a tool we may use. This is called the Functional Assessment Screening Tool, otherwise known as the FAST. And again, it's just a questionnaire. And you see it's just a series of yes or no questions, and it just goes through all of the various functions. So you ask the staff or the caregiver that knows the client well. The behavior usually occurs in your presence or the presence of others. Now, if it's for attention, then the answer will most likely be yes. And then if we look at something like number 4, the behavior often occurs when he or she has not received much attention. Again, that kind of tells us, oh, hey, in the presence of others, is this behavior occurring? And you pretty much go through every single one of the 4 functions of behavior. Each one has its own section. And then at the end, you just tally them all up. And the one with the highest amount of score kind of tells us, oh, that might be the function. So another form of indirect assessments would be open-ended interviews. So instead of giving the individual fixed questions, such as answering simply yes or no, oh, does the behavior happen when you're around? Does the individual engage in the behavior when they're alone? Do they do it if they're bored? Instead of asking those questions, we kind of leave it a little bit more open for them to give a little bit different detail. And this could lead to finding more particular forms of the variables that are controlling behavior besides just attention, access to tangibles. Then I can get into an example of this in just a moment. Yeah, usually you might hear me asking you guys a few open questions, especially during the collaborative meetings, because typically if you're asking somebody to give a little bit more detail instead of just yes or no, that can typically be a little more helpful. So this is what a open-ended interview may look like. This is from the practical functional assessments, which is something that my supervisor is having me trained in. So here, notice that there aren't any closed-ended questions. The first question is asking to describe the problem behavior and their precursors and the behavioral indicators. Ooh, all of a sudden we're getting a lot of detail. And then number 2, describe the reinforcers that are to be synthesized. So that's just an interesting way of saying putting together all of the reinforcers at once that are maintaining the behavior. Because one of the realized this kind of functional assessment found that there was this, it was a case study. There was this one girl, she would want to play with her toys, but she wouldn't want to play with them alone. She had to play them with her mom. If those 2 conditions were not met, then she would engage in the problem behavior. If she had just her mom's attention, she wasn't interested. If she only had the toys, again, wasn't interested. It was only when she was playing with her mom that would satisfy her need, her desires. But without those 2 conditions being met, she would engage in, I believe, outbursts and tantrums. So that's why it's really important for us to be able to get as much detail as possible with these types of assessments. Okay, so we got taking ABC data. We have indirect assessments in the form of questionnaires and interviews. Now this is where it can start getting a little fun, assisting in functional analyses. Now this is essentially creating an experiment, placing to test each one of the functions of behavior as a separate condition, which means let's start off with escape. We all know by now that the typical antecedent to escape is a demand or an unpleasant task being placed on an individual. I think we've all probably been there. A client doesn't want to go transition to, let's say, their van. So they engage in a behavior to escape it. If we are able to place a demand right then and there, then that's a way for us to test if that is what's maintaining it. So there are a few different kinds of tests that we can run. We can, of course, just start off with the control, just letting the individual by themselves, not introduce anything else, just seeing how they are just naturally. So let's take a look at what that may entail. So this is us just providing their reinforcers. They're on their own, they're happy, they're relaxed, they're engaged. So this is what this test condition may look like.
Let's play.
So he's just leaving them alone.
Cool pen you got there. Set of keys. Pretty cool.
So you see there, this is the control, so he's not going to do any demands. He's not going to give too much attention, just the occasional acknowledgement, just as things are as usual, nothing out of the ordinary. Now to test for escape, let's see what happens if we introduce some demands.
Some work. Say, mama. Mama. Hey, good job. Say, mama. Say, mama. 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 Excellent. Good job, Isabella. Say, mama. Say, mama. Mama. Say, mama. Mama. Well, say mama. Say mama. Say mama. Mama. Say mama. Say mama.
Let me get back.
So you see there, it wasn't until those later subsequent requests, and arguably the really intrusive requests with the mama are the ones that started the problem behavior. And as you see, when he turned away and stopped giving him the demands, the problem behavior ceased. So that's what it. So that's how we test for escape. And yeah, how do you think we would try to address attention? What would we have to withhold? If we want to see if a problem behavior is maintained by attention, what do we have to remove? See if it'll happen. Yes, attention. Yeah, exactly. So let's see what happens when we try to deliberately ignore the individual and see how they would respond.
All right, I'll have a seat in the chair. Some reading to do. I can play with this if you want. Remember, you can play with hats. Oh, you don't have to swing like that. You don't have to cry. You can play with this over here. Bella, you don't have to cry. You can play with this. You're crying. You don't have to cry. You can play with this camera. Bella, stop crying. You can play with this over here.
They broke character. So you see, presuming that the camera is a reinforcer designed or preferred item, I'll already have access to it. So we can safely rule out that it's not, the vocal outbursts are not for access, but attention. And you notice every single time that the instructor gave attention, they stopped. Interesting how that may work. It's almost as though they're doing it for attention. How about that? Okay. The other two conditions that we'll be taking a look at is what happens if we want to test for tangibles. If they have an item they like, such as a remote, they like playing with the remote, how do we behaviors maintained by tangibles? Access.
Taking it away?
Yes, exactly. We take it away. That's right. Oh, my turn. And then we go and see what happens.
Oh, there's no.
All right, let's take a look.
One minute, free access. My turn. What? It's my turn. You good? It's my turn.
Oh no, I kind of like this guy's acting a little bit better. Yes, his screams are a lot more realistic. Yeah, so from that latter examples, you saw that As soon as he said my turn and then he had to relinquish the item, that's when he began screaming. And then last but not least, we can also test for automatic behaviors. Those are sensory based. Since the individual does not require any social mediation, that they can do the behavior pretty much by themselves. What you do to test for this is you just leave them alone and see if they engage in the behavior. So let's take a look. Our last condition.
Right.
See, he's not even being present. He's just going to let him do his own thing.
Trying to.
All right, 2 minutes are up. So I believe the target behavior here was the jumping. And as you notice, there was, no attention, no tangibles of any sort.
So
There were no demands placed on him. So we can safely say that since he was doing it for sensorial purposes, sensory, yes, automatic.
for the sick.
Yeah, because even if he wasn't there at all, let's say he left the room, he probably would have still done it if it is for automatic reasons. Yeah, so that's how you test each one of the functions. Okay, just to repeat it, if you want to test for escape, you place the demands. If you want to test for attention, you withhold attention or ignore. If you want to test tangibles, you would remove the preferred item. And if you want to test for sensory or automatic, you would just leave the client
Leave them
alone.
alone.
Yes.
Sensory.
So it makes sense, guys, how it's those typical antecedents to the behaviors. That's the function. Yeah, and of course, if there is a more moderate to severe problem behavior that can be a little bit more dangerous, then if we want to use a functional analysis, we're just going to reinforce the precursors. So the things that happen before the behavior starts escalating to prevent the individual from harming themselves and others. Okay, and then for direct assessments, we can take a look at something called a scatter plot. Now, a scatter plot, you can think of it kind of like a full interval recording where you pretty much plot a graph for the entire day with all of the hours, and we record if a particular behavior happens at a particular time. And that tells us if there is a pattern. If, let's say, a client begins yelling and screaming around 11 or 10, maybe that can tell us that there's a pattern there. It might be doing it before lunch. And that could give us something to work off of. And then same thing if it's happening on particular days, such as on Mondays or on Fridays or in the middle of the week. So this is a simplification of what a scatter plot looks like. Again, you just cross off if the behavior occurred at that point. Again, just like a full interval recording. And from there, we can notice some few patterns. Here, it's safe to say that if we are going to pay a little bit more attention as to what's happening, 9 a.m. is our best bet. Maybe not so much at noon or 1 p.m., but I'm thinking, yeah, if we take a closer look and observe around 9 to 10, we'll probably be onto something. So that is a scatter plot. Pretty useful, again, just to be able to identify those patterns. Okay, yeah, and just to bring the functional assessment to a big summary. Whenever we're reporting ABC data, we want to be able to record the consequence as soon as we can. That way we have all of the information fresh in our minds. We're able to put down all the necessary details. Because again, the more description we're able to give, the more precise we're able to find and analyze what that function is. And then, yeah, I mean, it happens. Sometimes we don't see the antecedents. It'll be really ideal if you can capture the antecedents. But for those instances that you don't, yeah, you can put unknown for the time being. And hopefully with other separate instances, we can find what that antecedent will look like with additional observation. Any questions so far? Now this is a little bit more of a complicated one, but again, it's going to bring home together all of the things that we've been discussing these past couple of weeks. Ultimately, the big takeaway here, guys, is, yeah, just think functionally. Whenever you're interacting with the client and let's say they're engaging in their calm behavior, of course, reference the VIP, but also try to think, okay, why are they doing this? It's because something was removed? Was it because attention was removed? Are they doing it because it's a sensorial purpose? So they're just doing it because it feels good? Because it's only then that we're able to properly implement a procedure that can address those needs. Okay, so ready to get into the questions? All right, guys. What is the main goal of an FBA? BBB? Yes, BBB is right. Want to find out what's the purpose behind the behavior. What are the controlling variables in place so that we can address those? Otherwise, you'll just hear when the item's removed. Oh. If the client engages in behavior specifically to get out of doing a vocational task, such as folding laundry, what is likely the function?
It
is B, yes. You guys are right. Again, the typical antecedent to escape is a task demand, whether it be lengthy, difficult, or just undesired. That is the typical antecedent. What does C stand for in ABC data collection? C. A lot of C's on the page, yes. C stands for consequence. What happens immediately after the behavior occurs. Awesome job, guys. I don't ever remember us talking about concern. When writing an objective description of a behavior, which of the following is the best example? John was having a bad day. John was not compliant. John threw a notebook. Hearing C.
Yeah, I think so.
Think so? And you guys would be right. Yes, it is C.
Specific.
Yes, it's specific. Anybody can observe it. I mean, it's really hard to observe somebody having a bad day because you're not with them the whole time. But that's a situation for another time. Okay, moving on. We're doing strong. You're collecting ABC data. A client's peers walks into the room. The client immediately starts to shout. Peer walking in is the hearing A antecedents, A for antecedents, and the answer is antecedents. Yes. Another cause for escape is the presence of an unpleasant or undesired stimulus. Typically, that's in the form of a demand, but an individual who is non-preferred can do that, can have that same function as well. We have two more. Why is escape considered a common function in vocational training? I'm hearing A because work tasks can be difficult or aversive. That is exactly right. Yeah. The presence of something unpleasant leads to an escape response, and if that thing is reinforced, then bam, negative reinforcement. Something is removed, behavior increases. Last one. If you record a behavior happening at 10:15 a.m., 10:45 a.m., and then 1:30 p.m. on the grid for time-based patterns, you are using what?
A.
Oh, yes, it's A. No, ignore this, ignore this.
A.
I have no idea what a role play log is, guys. It is A. Man, I made that up. Yes, it's a scatter plot. Okay. Any function-based questions? Anything regarding the material, the clients?
This accordance of something like to the starter plot.
Mhm.
At 9 a.m., it introduces from start to finish. What is considered one time?
Yeah, if it just happens at the time you record it.
Because sometimes in that particular time, 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, maybe it's the time that he's shouting.
Yes, yes. And if we're able to get a good view of the whole week, then we can find if that's a pattern. If it's happening every single day or every other day, then that can kind of delineate where it is we should put our focus.
Shouting what?
Oh, I didn't provide an antecedents. Just in general.
Okay.
The emphasis was on the scatter plot, not the particular function. All right. Well, that is it. Then so we can be done for today. And yeah, well, I think we're discussing self-monitoring and procedural integrity next time. All right, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Of course.